Hello and welcome everybody that is here. Thank you so much. I know that some of you have very challenging time zones, which means you're up really, really early, but I'm very glad that you're here. We're gonna share a little bit about the lessons that we learned from conducting qualitative research on how young adults across 3 cultures experience solitude. And we wanted to share about the methodological approaches we took and the challenges that we faced and what decisions drove us towards such methods designs. Right, next slide. I'll just take some time. Oh, thank you. This is our Halloween acknowledgement slide. I don't know if everyone is excited about it. And I'm glad that Thuy and Zoey derailed me from going full Halloween on this stuff. Okay. So to introduce myself quickly, I am Aishwarya Iyer, or Aish for short. I am a graduate from the MSc program at the University of Glasgow from 2018. I've also taught in India for 2 years at 2 different institutes. And during this time is when we began this solitude research study, and it has spanned about 2 years now. So it's a long time coming. And thanks to this, I've also had a lot of fun times interacting with the PSA. So I'm also part of the PSA Community Building and Network Expansion Committee. And I'm looking to apply to PhD programs this year in evolutionary psychology and sustainable behavior. I'll quickly introduce my colleagues as well. This is Tong Zhou. I hope I'm not butchering your name. Okay, all right. She is a very knowledgeable and very enthusiastic and very learned doctoral student from East China Normal University, who just finished her master's from Shanghai Normal University, and she conducts research in how teachers respond and within classroom environments. And thanks to her collaboration, we've also got her on looking at the experiences of Chinese young adults in solitude. And finally, we have Thuy. She is an assistant professor currently at Durham University, and her research and expertise lie in the psychosocial variables that affect how we experience solitude. So she is the mastermind behind this project. Okay, so now that the fun and games are over, what we want to help you understand, or what the theme behind this presentation is, one large question that we have divided in 3 parts. First, we want to understand how we can help researchers build designs that can highlight unique and subjective experiences. This is quite different from the general quantitative approach of looking at generalizable evidence. We want to look at subjective evidence, and we want to do this while acknowledging the social and cultural context that these experiences exist within. So we want to highlight how culture plays a role in the subjective experiences that we have. And finally, we want to share our thoughts on how we conducted or created a design that could be culturally responsive as a form of scientific inquiry. I'm going to stress again that this is our experiences, so this is quite subjective, and that's very meta, but I hope this is something that we can all take away from. I'm going to pass this on to Thuy so she can share more information about the literature around solitude.
All right, so thank you for everyone for joining in our session today. So yeah, so as Ash has introduced, so originally we approached this with, just a curiosity around how solitude is experienced across different cultures. And we try to focus on emerging adults, and I'm going to explain a little bit why. So, so let's start with just the definition of this concept. So from the English dictionary, so we know that solitude is just the experience or a state or situation where you are alone. But actually, there has been a lot of debates and back and forth between the experts on this literature about whether or not we should include in the definition or conceptualization of solitude also the quality of the experience. Should we only consider solitude to be the time when we physically and objectively by ourselves in the space without other people present? Or should we consider solitude as a subjective experience such that you can sit in a coffee shop by yourself with other people around, but as long as you don't interact with another person, then you can still be considered alone? And another debate within the literatures is whether or not we should consider the word solitude itself is just include the positive and choiceful experience of being alone only, or does it include all different aspects, both positive and negative? So because of that, then there's just, when you talk about the concept of solitude alone, it's just a very complex phenomenon, and it has been studied from different perspectives. So you can see here in this figure, which summarize broadly how solitude can be related to other concepts such as social withdrawal, shyness, things like social exclusion. And also, so that would be included under the negative experiences umbrella. But when it comes to positive experiences, then you can think about different benefits of solitude, such as offering opportunities for emotion regulation, for self-exploratory or self-discovery, things like creativities and ways to connect with your spiritual deity. And then also the flavor, different experiences also depending on factors that I will go to the next slide. So as I have described, that solitude experience can depend on how you conceptualize it, how you operationalize it. Do you want to study solitude just as, you know, the person being alone physically, or in the context of like in a public space? So right now we're just beginning to build like a literature to separate different way of operationalize solitude. And then researchers also look at solitude from different motivation node, so as the drivers of solitude experience. So in this literature, it has been demonstrated that when we choose to be alone, we tend to see the time, experience the time as more positively compared to when we were forced into it, or when we feel like we have to spend time alone or should be alone at the time, either because of social factors like being excluded by your peers, or maybe sometime due to certain external circumstances. One situation that for example, with university student, they would talk about a lot is that I need to complete an assignment for school, so I'm gonna be alone at that time, but it's not because something that they would by self-endorse, so actually choose to do. And then there's also literature that cover the experience of solitude that is differentiated by age groups at different developmental stage. So with younger adults, solitude tend to be something that is less choiceful compared to older adults. There has been more papers covering positive themes in solitary experience for older adults. And then there's a fewer smaller literatures that actually start to explore different contexts around solitude. And with the word context, we actually refer to different cultural contexts. So the Wang paper in 2006 compared between the Western samples with Chinese samples. And then Zhou et al. 2018 compared between within South African, but then also compare between Caucasians group and other ethnic groups. So you can see that within the literature, we started to see that solitary experience can vary both within and also across social cultural contexts. So when we think about like different motivations or different age groups, so those would be the factors that kind of vary the solitary experience within context. But now the focus of our project would be to explore the across the difference across social cultural contexts. But how can we do that while still staying authentic with the within aspects? So that's what we want to talk to you about today. So first, I just want to start with the one of the dilemma that is very salient in the cross-cultural psychology literatures and has been discussed like a while back. And it's interesting that when the three of us conducted this research, we actually didn't know about this epistemological discussions. We basically just thought that we want to stay true to the culture from which the phenomenon is studied. We want to study solitude within the cultures, like within the samples where the participant come from, the cultures where the participant come from. And we thought that, you know, that's just an approach that makes sense to us to stay authentic to how that experience is expressed by the participant within their cultures. And then it just happened that actually we just discovered that there is this Etic-Emic dilemma where the theorists that have discussed about how when you study cross-cultural differences, the emic approach is when you describe behaviors within a particular culture using concepts relevant in that culture. So you see this approach used by a lot of ethnographic literature. So when the researcher will come into that cultures and just study that culture by itself. And then the ethic approach describes behavior using the researchers' imposed criteria and not necessarily derived from the cultures being studied. So from my experience being a trained social psychologist, I would say that a lot of my research actually come from an ethic approach, because we consider a very familiar scenario such that you usually we would have a team. So in this example, I'm just gonna use the US as an example. So a team of US researchers, they might develop and validate scales and measures on US participant and usually college student US participant. And then if they want to conduct a cross-cultural studies, they would then use the measures that they have developed and validate on US participant and recruit one sample from the US and translate the measure into a foreign language. For in this case, we use an example of Chinese samples, and then recruit Chinese participant, and then you conduct some t-test or group comparison to look at the difference between the two cultures. So we see the problem of this approach is that you basically, this team of researchers basically validate and measures and identify a phenomenon or concept within one cultures and simply apply that concept to a different cultures. So whatever difference you detect here mainly just tell you whether or not something that has been found in US cultures can be found in other culture, but it doesn't tell us what is actually exists in the other cultures. So this is basically our original intention, that we just come in and we said, well, if we really want to study solitude from another cultural perspective, we can't use this approach. So now I'm just gonna repeat that same example, but in a qualitative design. So you can have the same team from of a researcher in the US, and we can interview participant in the US and then interview participant from a Chinese sample. Whatever Chinese interviews or text that we collect, we then translate that to English, and then the English interviews transcribed text from both US sample and the Chinese sample can then be coded by the US-based coders. So this has been identified as the pseudo-etic approach, because it doesn't really it doesn't actually embrace the cultures where the cultures where the Chinese sample comes from, but because it's basically simply when in the process of translating the interviews, you kind of already lose some of the flavors of that phenomenon within that cultures. And at the same time, when that is coded by the same research team for both the US sample and the Chinese sample, then we're afraid that this approach will actually introduce this bias perspective that just gonna be imposed from the US research team. So because of that, we embrace this thing that the literature would call the combined Etic-Emic approach. So in this paper that I included here, they talk about the 3 stages inquiry. So first you identify the Etic construct that's assumed to have a universal status. So we know we can fairly confident that solitude is an experience that can be experienced in across different cultures. Being alone is a pretty common experience that we all have. So, and then the next stage is you understand this construct amicably. So within the cultures where that, so depending on what cultures you pick, you just study that concept within that cultures. So this inform how the interviews and the coding were conducted. And finally, I actually really like this phrase in the quotes here. So amicably defined Etic construct will allow us to actually study, take a more authentic approach to study a cross-cultural comparison, because by then you already let each cultures have a voice to speak about this phenomenon, and we just consolidate them and see what are the similarities and what the differences. So with that, I'm just gonna quickly go over some of the previous literature that have talked about, that have studied solitude within the 3 cultures that we picked for this study. So in the US cultures, so assumingly a more Western cultures, so solitude is usually when people study solitude, they study it from the perspective of the independence separation perspective, where they consider that the desire or the intention to be alone also part of the drive for independence when people as younger adults navigate their time spending time alone and being with other people. But from this study, from the Chinese perspective, then sometimes shyness or withdraw yourself from social interaction can be perceived negatively as a selfish act, because the expectation is that you need to integrate yourself and choose to be with others. And from the Indian perspective, solitude is usually viewed positively as a form of spirituality seeking, and then usually in the form that we usually know as meditation. So therefore, from this literature, we hope to identify some of the subjective experience within and across all these 3 cultures. So I'm gonna pass that on to Ash to talk about our research design.
Thank you, Thuy-vy. Before I continue, I want to quickly summarize what we intended to bring with this presentation. We wanted to make a point about how solitude's literature is quite complex, and to tease apart the experience, we wanted to come up with a design, a qualitative design, which would highlight the subjective experience. From my personal, if I could add into that, for example, in the last slide, you saw that in India, we have evidence that spending time alone for spiritual awakening is considered a very positive experience. However, personally, sometimes I just want to spend time alone because social interaction gets too much and you want to take some time off. Additionally, in India, you also get a negative connotation for someone actively telling their friend group that I don't want to be with you right now. Can I just come back to you later? So we know that Solitude is not understood quite simply. There are multiple contexts within it, and then there's an added layer of culture within it. So we wanted to design a research study that would highlight subjective experience, compare it across cultural contexts, but allow for the data to be participant driven, or as Thuy just highlighted about emic versus etic dilemmas, and also display this data authentically, which means that as researchers from 3 different cultures, we're also able to reflect on where we are coming from as researchers, because we are technically looking for the objective truth or the objective evidence. So the research design that we had was we developed research questions based off of the literature and general curious questions that we wanted to search. We developed interview questions based off of these research questions, and then we piloted this interview questions with a focus group, which was conducted in India with 18 to 23-year-olds. I will come back to why this piloting was important, and it made significant changes to how we moved ahead with the research study. And the interview protocol that we developed post this pilot was mimicked across India, US, and China, with one key difference. Indian and the US samples were asked questions in a semi-structured 1:1 interview, but also a focus group of multiple people within the same session. Again, this just comes from a curious perspective of, will it make a difference if we ask individuals 1:1, or we put them in a room with other people who might not share the same opinion? And then we come to transcribing. We transcribed all of our interviews, and for India and US, we did this in English. Interviews were conducted in English and they were transcribed into English. In China, the data collection happened in Chinese. The transcription of the Chinese interview was also in Chinese. And the coding was conducted by Chinese researchers, and the data remains in its original language up until thematic analysis, and only at the analysis stage does it get translated into English. Again, this is important because we wanted to highlight the authentic, subjective experience of participants from the Chinese culture, which means that they should be allowed or given a space to explain their experience in the language that is most comfortable to them. In India and US, the coding was also done by people within this culture. So in India, the coding, the initial identification of themes, the review of these themes, all of them were conducted by Indian researchers. And in US, while the coding was conducted by a UK-based researcher, the review was conducted by Thuy, and we also identified themes within that context. Something I believe is a good strength of our study is that it's a lot of mix of people from different cultural contexts. And we have 3 different varieties of emic versus etic dilemma. And I think Tong is going to highlight that later as and when we come to that. Okay, for now, let me take you through the research questions we asked. Okay. So based off of our initial literature review, we asked 4 questions and 4 research questions. The first is a very large open question about how do individuals experience solitude? Of course, research questions are usually recommended to be far more specific, but the reason this is open is because of the conflict that exists in the operationalization of solitude as a construct. There's not a lot of agreement about whether we look at solitude as a state, as physical aloneness, as mental aloneness, or do we look at it as a habit or a practice? So we wanted to make sure that we kind of encompassed all varieties. So that's why it's an open research question. We wanted to look at what drives people into seeking solitude. So that's the second research question at the bottom. What influences drive the seeking of solitude? We wanted to look at a very culture-specific question, which is what happens when you experience solitude in a non-shared or private space versus when you have to experience it in a shared or non-private space, like in a dorm that you share with your roommate, or in a park, in a public space. And finally, we had a research question that was central to comparing solitude experience across cultures. However, this was not a question that we asked directly in our interview, because we wanted to make sure that this is a question we reflect on during analysis. So our interviewees were never asked a direct question about, do you think this is specific to your culture? We wanted to make sure that they explained their authentic experience. And as analysts, this was the ethic construct. Am I using the term correctly? Yeah, so this was a scientist-driven question that we were trying to apply on the participant-driven data. Okay, so let's look at our interview questions. And can we go to the next slide? Okay, so these are two examples of our interview questions. Please note that there's going to be some words in black and some in red. The red are the ones that we edited after the pilot study. So this is based off of the reflection of participants and the researchers in that focus group. So an example is, we wanted to ask, how do you spend time alone, and how much do you spend time alone in a day, for example? Note that there are variety of questions. We have a main question, which is, do you find yourself choosing to spend time alone by yourself? And can you tell us about an experience? This was our primary question. And if our participants responded positively or encouragingly to this, we continued with a probe or a secondary question. Of course, that was a much more specific one, such as, how often does this experience last in the day versus in the night, and so on. In terms of affective, we wanted to consider both the positive and negative experiences. So we asked them, how do you feel when you spend this time alone? And can you tell us about a positive experience? Why was it positive? Where did it happen? How did you feel during this time? And can you tell us about a negative experience? Again, same questions: why, where, and what happened. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Okay. So based on these interview questions, we had the following data. And I think this is a very, very rich amount of data for qualitative inquiry. In the US, we had 35 participants, 69% of whom were female and 26% were male. And we conducted two kinds of inquiry. We did 18 1:1 semi-structured interviews and four focus groups with 3 to 5 individuals in them. In India, we had 43 participants, with 55% of them female, 36% of them male. Again, we conducted 18 1:1 semi-structured interviews, and we conducted 5 focus groups with 5 members each. The average age of the participants in India was 24 years. And in China, we had 28 participants, with 57% of them female and 39% of them male. And the average age here is 18 years. And in China, we only conducted semi-structured interviews. Okay, this brings me to our practice of conducting a pilot. And I want to stress on why we chose to pilot a study. And this does relate to our concern about making sure that our approach was culturally respectful, culturally responsive. And it also came from a place of the 3 of us being novice researchers in qualitative inquiry. So we wanted to make sure that the questions we were asking were actually perceived in the same line that we wanted to ask them in. So it was a matter of validating our interview questions. And I believe within the context of this research study, this was a very helpful practice. Can you go on to the next slide, Thuy? Brilliant. Okay. So let me take the example of the question on the left. So the agency 2 questions in red. The questions are, some situations might result in us finding ourselves physically or mentally experiencing alone time without choosing it. And if this has existed in your experience, can you tell me about it? And a follow-up or a similar question is, how is this experience of finding yourself alone without choosing it any different from an alone time that you choose for yourself? This question emerged out of the reflection that happened after our focus group. Our initial focus group, which was a pilot study with the first version or the draft version of our interview schedule, had participants talk a lot about how some of their solitude experiences were positive, and sometimes they simply found themselves alone, and it was not because of their choice. It was because they were socially excluded, or they felt like they couldn't relate with their friends. So we realized, based on our reflection, based on the feedback of our participants, this is an important theme to consider. We also found that this is a growing theme in the literature, wherein agentic solitude is mostly perceived positively as compared to controlled or forced solitude. So this is a classic example of why piloting was quite important for our study and could be a very additional tool to qualitative research when conducted cross-culturally. There might be questions or perspectives or themes that we hadn't considered originally, and is a good addition to consider when the participants express that it is. Okay. All right, which brings me to the constant word I keep using, reflection. I know that qualitative researchers often will tell you so much about reflecting, and it is indeed a very, very important factor to consider, but in part it is because of the paradigms that we went ahead with in this research project. So the paradigm that we used was social constructivism, which is the assumption that we are looking for a socially constructed form of reality. So reality is not objective. It is not something that we can all agree on. We have different versions of reality or multiple versions of the truth. Now, this inherently goes against the positivist paradigm that quantitative research is usually conducted in. Quantitative research comes from the inherent assumption that there is one objective truth, and we are designing a study based on theoretical assumptions to identify this objective truth. Within this study, and usually within exploratory or inductive or data-driven qualitative research, the assumption is that we know something exists, and we know that it differs across social cultural contexts, and the best way to learn about it is for our participants and for our data to tell us what it is. And that is where we were coming from. And to make sure that our participants across different cultures could accurately, authentically, and in a safe space tell us about their complex solitude experiences, we had to make sure that our interview questions were open. They had multiple probes. They looked at both the positive and the negative side of things, and they were open to feedback from our participants. That means we were open to reviewing our interview questions as and when we conducted the research study. Another important addition is the reflection that follows when we do analysis. And Zoe can tell you more about how we engaged in reflection as we conducted the analysis for this study.
Okay, thank you, Ash, and thank you, Thuy-vy, and thank you for everyone to interested in our research. This part, we will discuss the protocols that ensure our method use are actually cultural responsibly. And so we want to highlight both sides. So for the one part, we want to maintain the cultural uniqueness. And for the other side, we also want to make sure our result can be compared cross-culture. So I will introduce firstly about how we make sure our result can be compared cross-culture. So as we mentioned before, we use the STEM methods, for example, the interview protocols to explore these questions across culture. And also we use the STEM data analysis process across culture. Finally, the open notebook will allow us to communicate with each other, and also we can have the same access of information that we can get. So these three steps that we can make sure us that that we think the result we found can be compared cross culture. So next, I will introduce you about each steps. Is about how can we keep the maximal cultural uniqueness throughout the entire research process. So the first part is how we collect data. I will use the Chinese sample to take the example. So in China, our interviewer is myself, and who is researcher, and share the same cultural background with our interviewees. And I will give you this example, the word called 天人合一 in Chinese, which means a feeling that you have the integration between nature and human. This word, people use it to describe their positive solitude feelings when they have time to be alone. So why we think that we have the same background with our interviewees have more useful and advantages because Thuy, please. Because so for the first, it is more easier for us. Oh no, it's the next part. So it's easier for us to ask appropriate following up questions. So yeah, for example, when they mentioned this word 天人合一 as a Chinese, I will get easier to figure out, yeah, it is a typical cultural uniqueness word. So we can explore more questions with our participants about why they use this word and the background or the cultural background of this word. How can they get access to this, and what's the relationship with the solidarity experience, so on. So we also let our participants in our culture to redefine the concept of solitude, which also I think is calling back to the dilemma while Thuy-vy mentioned before. So give them the freedom to redefine each concept that we think is related with culture or related with solitude experience that we think they express the Chinese culture. And also we can ask our participants in questions in different ways to explore their underlying meanings or descriptions or expressions of solitude in the Chinese culture. So this is our data collection part. And in the data coding part, because we want to avoid the interviewer or our researcher bias, which is as a researcher, we already know the existing theories. So which will narrow our ways to doing the coding work. So we invite the psychology students as our coders, or we will say the interpreters. And they also share the same cultural background with our participants. So all the coding or interpreting work in Chinese. And because we want to make sure that our result is can be compared cross-culture, so we use like greater transparency in each step of coding. I will show you the example later. Yeah, so here is the coding table we used when we're doing the coding part. So in this table, we train our participants. Next, Thuy-vy, please. We want to train our participants to to balance the subjectivity and also want them to maintain their flexibility. So when we training them, we first tell them that what is the social constructivism. So this is the methodology we use to analyze our data. And we also introduce them what is subjectivity and reflexibility. So let them have the basic idea of what qualitative research is, because some of our coders are training as quantitative students. So we also tell them about the rough research aim of this research, but we will not tell them like the specific directions about where directions they need to code. We just tell them that this research is want to explore the solitude experience in Chinese culture. So this rough research aim. And we want them to pay more attention to any cultural expressions that reflect Chinese culture when they're coding. And finally, we ask them to code independently because we want them to discuss later. So independently means we want two coders to code one transcriptions together. So that they can discuss this transcription later and give us more information. This table here is we use these 3 lines, so participants' characteristics, lines, and initial codes to reflect our coders' subjectivity. So participant characteristics will use it to let our coders to write down after they read over the whole transcriptions. They will use some word or phrases to describe what they think this participant is. And the lines, our coders can decide themselves to cut what part of the transcriptions and paste them here. The initial code is the part that they can use some word or phrases to describe this describe lines. So these 3 parts all reflect subjectivities. And the next is reflexibility. Sorry, the reflexibility. What we use to reflect is we create lines of notes. So the notes part is what we want our participants to write down anything they think that related with coding process. For example, why they're doing this code, why they decide to use this phrase or word to describe these lines. Or we also want them to highlight or pay more attention to cultural uniqueness. So we want them to reflect if there is any ideas related with Chinese culture. So in this part, they can write down anything like questions or sentences or phrases that reflect their own thoughts. So as I mentioned before, 2 coders, they are coded together with 1 transcriptions. So in the next step, we are going into the discussion part. So the discussion part is, is the part that we want our coders to extend their subjectivity and reflexibility. So you can see this table, we call this collaborative table. The initial codes change into 1 lines into 2, and as well as the note part. So that is the one that we combine these 2 coders' ideas together into 1 collaboration codes table. And they discussed, depending on this table, about why they make this decision and like why there is some difference exist and what they interpret with these differences. So next one, please. Yeah. So in the discussion part, because of the COVID-19, so they can only meet. Oh, sorry. So they can only meet online, and they code together. Of course, in the first discussion, me as the researcher will get into the. Sorry, would you mind to go back into the next slide? Yeah, thank you. So when they have the first meeting of discussion, so me as the researcher will join them into the first meeting, but I will not tell them like they need to exactly do something, but I will tell you the directions, like how they use this collaborative table, and they need to pay more attention to the cultural expressions. And also I will tell them we want them to write down like all the discussion parts they think that reflect their discussion sections or like reflect their reflections, to add them into the notes part. So during this discussion, we extend our information from just can come from our participants into the information came from our coders and our participants from these both sides. So when we have this all materials, we are going into the analysis part. The next one is we using these all initial codes and nodes to analysis together. Yes. So when we analyze all these initial codes and nodes, we are using in Chinese. And we also use Chinese to create subthemes and main themes. And only if we have the final result created already in Chinese, translation happened at this time. So we want to use this step to help us maintain the maximum cultural uniqueness throughout this entire process. So the other advantages of the current strategy is our language assistant actually is me researcher and our coders. So as a researcher shared the same cultural background with our participants, we first understand the research aim and literature background, which will help us better to translate the Chinese result. And also, we share the same cultural background and also have the better understanding of each part of research process will help us keep transparency when we report the results. And also because our coders during their discussion and make decision about initial code part during this process, our coder also joined in to create materials for later analysis. So we asked our coders to evaluate how appropriate our translate is. So they can also join us as the language assistant to help us. So the next part is the data report part. We haven't yet, but this is our plan. So we will maintain the transparency in the process in our report. And also we decided to report the result both in Chinese and English. So in English is, but we also reported in the Chinese part in the result. So in English is what we want is there's more readers can be accessed and can read these findings. And in Chinese is what we want is we put the Chinese result into the appendix, or we set the link on the OSF so that people can get access to our working tables and also for our Chinese result. So when people can find the materials to compare the Chinese result or English result, they can find one. So yes, this is our procedures to maintain and keep the maximum cultural uniqueness in the for the entire process of research. So thank you so much for your attention, and I think we are going into the Q&A part. Is there any questions you have to ask up for three of us?
Yes, I have a question. When you are speaking about cultural integration, what exactly does it entail?
Does anyone want to take the question, or I can go ahead?
Go ahead, Ash.
Okay. When we talk about cultural integration, I think our first priority was making sure that the researchers themselves were representative of the culture that they were exploring and inquiring about. So as Zoe said, at least in her Chinese data set, she herself was the main researcher who conducted the interview. So the interview was in Chinese. They shared the same culture with our participants, which made sure that they were more comfortable and what they were communicating was understood in the same context. So there was no back translation involved. And the same with coders. Coders understood the data in the context that it was presented. And I think we also have nice comparisons within India, wherein I was the main interviewer, but I did the interview in English. And that was mostly because the participants were from an urban setting and English was the language they were most comfortable with, which is a conflict from, say, if I was doing this in a rural or semi-urban setting where I would have to use the regional language. So I think culture integration happens at multiple levels. You need to consider language, you need to consider sharing of the culture between researcher and participant. And then you also need to consider how all of these researchers involved in the process bring their own thoughts and their cultural context into the analysis.
Thank you.
Yes, we have another question.
May I ask? I think I had my hand up. So first, thank you for the amazing presentation. That was really, really awesome. One question that I was thinking about, I think you mentioned in one of those slides that everyone was asked the same questions. And I was thinking whether due to these cultural differences, it might be in some cases at least more useful to have a different question pattern for different cultures. Did you consider this, and what do you think about that?
I don't know if Tong would have, because I'm the one that have the easy part of this whole process, because I do everything in we interview in English and also we code in English, but I think that is also why we keep our question very open-ended. And I think so when Ash and Tong conduct their research, they also have follow-up probing questions. So like how Tong described earlier, that if there's certain phenomenon or words that the participant said that is very unique in the Chinese cultures, then the researcher will be there to kind of elaborate on those, ask them to elaborate on those words or phrases that the participant use. So that is also the reason why we keep it semi-structures rather than structures, because we try to be mindful that sometimes there's certain things that might come up that we just can't anticipate at the stage of planning for the questions. Yeah. And I don't know if Tong, you want to talk more about whether or not there's certain things that come up that you guys have to kind of just handle along the way as participants raise certain things that you need to address.
I only made one situation is because we are setting the open questions for them, open-ended question for them to explore their solitude experience, describe their solitude experience. And our participants sometimes will ask me like, can you tell me what solitude is? So at this part, we will ask them, so what do you think what solitude is? That is what I mentioned. We let them the opportunity to redefine the concept. So that's also, I think that is a great way for us to understand in this culture what people think solitude is. So just give them the word solitude. So let them to speak out for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to add with Zoe's point, which is in at least for me, we had certain participants that spoke Hindi as their native tongue and some who were Tamilians or they spoke Tamil. And in both these languages, alone is either akela in Hindi or taniya irkardu in Tamil. And they have the state version of these words. In Hindi, it would be akelapan, which translates to loneliness. And in Tamil, it also is tanimai, which also translates to loneliness. So I think English was beneficial because I could switch between both these languages and I could explain to them that I acknowledge that there is a negative a connotation, which is loneliness, but I want to also know if there's a positive thing. Did you have a good experience with this solitudeness or akelapan or tanimay. And another question that was came out of after conducting these interviews was the agency question, because finding yourself alone in the Indian context was very much a common phenomena for the participant group I had. We had a lot of women who got married and they were living in the house of their in-laws, and it was a very sudden transition from living in the house that they grew up in versus living with their in-laws, and they found themselves alone because they did not know the people they were living with. So this was another context that we had to add and probe in the follow-up interviews.
May I have a quick follow-up to this, unless others have questions? I don't see others hands up, so maybe. Another thing that comes to mind is, did you experience some of those things that when speaking of reflexivity, often qualitative researchers talk about that kind of non-verbal experiences that are difficult to capture, for instance, in transcripts and communicate to the people. So did you experience during these interviews these kinds of elements that you felt would need to be incorporated into the knowledge that you created, and how did you deal with this if such things occurred?
I think I would ask you to elaborate because I'm not sure I understand the questions. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So, for instance, sometimes when if the interviewee is feeling like if you can see something, for instance, there is a long pause that is indicative of something, and you necessarily can't include that in the transcript, or if they are feeling nervous and you can see that as an interviewer very clearly, but again, if you just make a verbal like text transcript, you can't see this in the transcript. So did you feel the need to include these kinds of maybe emotional or behavioral elements that were present in the physical interview space, but were not in the transcript, something like this? But yeah.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because I think that, like, at least for my experience, because I interview I do the like one-on-one interviews, and I have another person who has a clinical background, because I felt like she would be a better person to kind of do the focus group and also help me with one-on-one interviews. And we did have the experience of, in one-on-one interviews, it tend to be shorter. University student, like that's the main group that we recruited for our US sample. They have less to say by them, like when it's just between the researchers and them, they tend to just answer the questions and then that's that. So I think, yeah, I think that was what you said was very interesting, because I definitely did not. Basically, we let the participant have their time to answer, and then if they say all they have to say, and then we go to the next question. And I think that is why but I felt like it was lucky that we incorporate the focus group part, because I think the advantage of focus group is that then people again, focus groups tend to be longer than a one-on-one interview, because when one participant says something and then the other group get to feedback to what have been said, they get to build on what have been said, or they might contradict the previous participant. Yeah, so in that sense, then we have less of the silent in between. But what you said is very interesting, because we definitely haven't really, at least for me, we haven't, our team, we haven't considered a silent in between. Yeah. I don't know if Ash and Tong might have other.
Yeah, I think I have some, because I also have the clinical background, so I think I'm maybe more sensitivity with these feelings during the interview. But I think it's just my personal opinion. Is I will keep these feelings. So keep the feelings of interaction with our participants, and then use these feelings and keep trying, because this feeling is kind of reflect subjectivity of myself. But in our research process is we invite our coders to code. So it's kind of like we cut off this subjectivity of the interviews to miss this kind of information. So this is the decision that we made, but we keep our coders subjectivity using the notes. So let them discuss, or we record this and so on. And I think the balance of subjectivity and reflexibility is very important in qualitative research, because for the one hand, I prefer to keep these feelings, and I think these feelings can help us to, when we are doing the thematic analysis, and also when we how can we combine the themes together, and how can we interpret the result? These feelings can help us at this part. And also, like, I think, just for my own opinions, it's like reflexibility is also very important, because maybe I just have some bias for maybe a very silent male, and I think, oh, he's just rude. So I think reflexibility is also very important. So this is how I deal with this situation. So just keep the we have some steps, and we have some areas to reflect the subjectivity and reflexibility, and keep these feelings, and keep asking ourselves why we are doing this work and writing. Yeah.
And I think Ash added her thoughts in the chat, and then I think it's time for the next team. So we're just gonna move on. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think it's our turn, but I'm not sure if I should share the screen as if right now. Okay, I'll start right now. I don't know if you can see my screen. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this event. It truly is an honor and a privilege to share this information and this topic that this research that we are conducting with you guys, and be able to receive your feedback and share thoughts about this topic that is very important. In this case, from our team, we are presenting the validity and reliability of the scale to measure access to transformative justice at work. It's a sample from the northwestern Mexico, Hermosillo, Sonora, Mexico. My name is Martin Romero Cruz, and I am a PhD student. With us in our team, research team, is the PhD professor, full-time professor of the University of Sonora in the law department and the psychology department, Marta Frías Armenta. And we also have Nadia Corral, who is also a PhD in psychology and a full-time professor at the University of Sonora in Hermosillo, Sonora. We're going to start with the background of this research and talking about a little bit about an introduction. From 1990 to 2019, there has been a decrease in women's participation in the labor force in the world, representing 38.8% of all labor market participants. Unpaid work, meaning childcare and household chores, falls disproportionately on women, hampering profit opportunities. Representation of women in leadership positions are low. This is worldwide, and the gender gap remains wide and higher levels despite progress of women in education. Very few women are CEOs of the largest corporations. And also another aspect that is really important to show is that leaky pipelines for women in leaderships are happening as we speak. Representation of women declining as hierarchical powers levels increase in this pyramid of hierarchical workforce. In Mexico, speaking about our country, women's economic participation increased from 33.5% to 49.1%. And although the percentage of economically active women increased with the level of schooling, 3 out of 10 women still remain outside the labor market among those with highest education, as well as they continue to be on workforce that is unregistered. In 2016, the World Economic Forum set Mexico as the 66th country out of 144 countries for gender equality, and 122nd in economic participation and opportunity, and 51st in education and attainment, and 34th in political empowerment, meaning that our country is still very high in the gender gap when it comes to women's participation in all aspects, including the workforce. Speaking about what we're measuring here, which is transformative justice, we have some aspects that are theoretical background. Transformative justice is a critic framework lens used to analyze and define structural violence, meaning structural violence may lead to severe social consequences, such as marginalization, poverty, and exclusion. TJ, or transformative justice, emphasizes personal and social change, challenging the intersections of power and inequality, as well as global and local structures of exclusion. Transformative justice has been gaining increased traction in the pursuit of gender justice, and it has a great array of theoretical contribution about the need for this transformative justice framework to be applied. However, there's still a lot of work to do. It's essential to investigate in the workplace because it can help to approach gender inequalities. And we constructed and we proposed this model to measure and evaluate the access to transformative justice, which has these variables: inclusion, capacity, responsibility, and sustainability. When it comes to inclusion, we use the operational term inclusion as being heard under conditions of mutual respect, a process that may include the creation of own institutions with different cultural approaches to justice. And when it comes to the term capacity, we concluded that it's providing individuals with the power of an agency to exercise their rights and respond to their obligations while providing them with financial, social, and legal resources. When it comes to responsibility, we concluded and we proposed that it consists of granting mutual responsibility and considering the need of all while promoting the obligation of the authorities to respond. So it's a bidirectional term. Sustainability, it implies that changes that have been achieved in any temporal dimension are sustainable, and meaning that they remain over time and they can be self-maintained. The justification and objective of our research is to give the importance to those gender inequalities, not only in Mexico, but worldwide. It is crucial to validate instrument to assess and try to research this the possibility of structural change. The authors, for us, we have been doing a lot of research, and as I was saying, there is a huge array of theoretical contributions. However, there aren't enough instruments to assess transformative justice at the workplace, especially regarding gender issues. And the objective of this research is to validate a transformative justice self-report instrument within the work environment. The method that we use to validate and confirm the reliability of this instrument was a non-probabilistic convenience sample, where inclusion criteria were people older than 18 who lived in Sonora, who spoke Spanish, had access to internet, and voluntarily agreed to participate through informed consent. Our sample included 315 participants with average age of 25 years old. and mostly male. So we need to amplify the sample because we had 60% male, 30% female, and we also have had a little bit of participation from non-binary and other gender. The instrument was developed through theoretical coherence due to research in previous literature. It was comprised through 4 proposed factors: capacity, as I was saying, capacity, inclusion, responsibility, and sustainability. The instrument was a hybrid that included items created specifically for this instrument and this use, and as well as some modified items from a previous instrument to measure agency. The instrument had acceptable reliability, meaning an alpha of 894, and each factor had a positive Cronbach alpha as well. The data analysis, we performed normality test, skewness and kurtosis, and univariable test, meaning the means and the standard deviation. Also, we use reliability test with the Cronbach alpha, and we perform all of this using the IBM SPSS software, which is used for social sciences. We used confirmatory factor analysis, CFA, and this was performed through the robust method in EQS V6 software. The confirmatory factor analysis via the robust method showed that the 4th factor for measuring transformative justice, this model showed acceptable goodness of fit. And here we have the model, and we're going to give you a little bit of time to view it, as well as this presentation has been available to you, so we can continue this discussion if you are interested. And our discussion was the constructed instrument provide to be valid and reliable as an instrument to validate and check reliability of the axis of transformative justice in a region of Mexico. Each sub-factor showed acceptable internal consistency, which is higher than 716. And the validity, when it comes to validity, the confirmatory factor model showed moderate to high and significant covariances between the factors, suggesting convergent validity. However, capacity, which was the instrument that we modified to be used for this particular instrument that we adapted from another instrument to measure capacity, had low factor loadings. Limitations and our recommendations for future studies. When it comes to our research, responses may include social desirability, and future research should include various methods like we were seeing in the presentation before. Qualitative research is very important as well. The sample had a large enough size, but included not many working students, which meaning, and we suggest that research should include participants who are currently working, and future research should investigate these constructs in other cultural contexts to address the existing differences that may arise from social and structural inequalities and vulnerable populations. And for us, that would be all that we have to present today. We are so grateful, and if you have any questions, this would be the time, and thank you very much.
Hello, I just want to say that this research, they have the first part of this instrument that we did 3 years ago. It was qualitative research, and we did focus groups with researchers, and they gave us ideas what could be transformative justice and how to measure the transformative justice. This is the second part that we try to do at instrument. This is only validated in a small part of Mexico. So we hopefully we try to do in different parts of Mexico, and we try to do in another parts of the world, because the transformative justice is a new way to see inclusion for women. And in this case, we apply to work, but in another stage, we are going to apply for family violence, or for different kinds of problems for women. I don't know if you can give us some feedback or comments about this. Martin was very fast, but I don't know if you want to explain more about some of the data analysis or something else.
Yeah, sure. Well, this instrument, as you were saying, it truly is something that is really important, because we transformative justice has been showed that is a necessary means to change structural violence, meaning not only physical violence, but also symbolic violence and other types of violence that are not necessarily being researched at the moment, and also because the need to conciliate certain aspects of that it can provide integration of all aspects of life, like work and family and all these aspects that are really important. Transformative justice is definitely a new way of seeing things, and going beyond sanctions, and going beyond law, and going beyond our perspective of access to justice. It goes to the transformation of social structures, and it could be applied in any environment. And yeah, if we have any questions.
There was a question for you, Martin. Aish said if you are planning on doing comparisons with other constructs to look at divergent validity.
Well, we think so. Yeah, we are definitely considering to improve our research, and those are some of the options that we're considering. Yeah.
Yes, in this time we are presenting only one of the instruments we are going to use for the old research, and after this first step we are going to use the other instruments in the same time, but in order to check out this discriminant and convergent and validity.
Thank you. And also the follow-up, I wonder if you've thought about, so I don't know what kind of answer types you used. Could you tell me quickly about what they were?
Yes, so this instrument was actually just to measure inclusion, responsibility, and capacity and sustainability in the workplace. So we were trying to figure out if in the work trajectory of individuals, there have been times where they felt excluded, and the questions were focused to see if they had participation when it comes to capacity, and also if the institution where they work or the company where they work, they had the capacity to share points of view, and if they felt included, if they had all these elements that are important for the integration. And also we were trying to figure out if during during their trajectory there have been improvements, because in Mexico there have been a lot of politics to try to change inclusion of women. So those questions were focused to see if there has been change through time.
Correct. So were these yes or no questions? Were they Likert scales or open-ended?
Those were Likert scales, and yeah,
okay.
were Likert scales.
Okay. So something I reflect on or think about a lot is, do you use the neutral option when you're providing Likert scales? Because I know this is something that has come up recently about in collective cultures, people are much more likely to just go for the neutral option, especially when it's a charged topic like you're asking, right? So have you thought about this and are you considering alternative answer options?
Yes, in quantitative research, there definitely are a lot of options, and we opted for the neutral option as well. But yeah, we need to reflect as well on that. It's a very good question, so thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. I look forward to seeing how and where this goes. Yeah,
me too. I love this research. It really talking about transformative justice is something very transformational. So I was wondering if you have any more questions, or if you would like to add anything else, Dr. Nadia Corral or Dr. Marta Frias.
I don't know. For me, it's all. The idea is you have time to explain the first part of the research, to outside researchers, and you receive some feedbacks. This is a very start of your PhD proposal, so it's good to be here, and any comment is welcome. And this is very interesting research, and because we even in the world we saw that many women can get some very specific kind of job, but when this very competitive or very high standard job that is very difficult to advance. So we try to find why this is what is the problem, and transformative justice give us some theoretical background about how to measure of these problems that women can be involved in order to advance and to be, for example, as to be a scientist in the world. Why so many women stop trying to reach different positions. So this is the only is only one of the things that we are going to revise in this research. So I think this is a good start and a good theoretical background, and we are going to include another variables in the future. Well, actually, we have this is the only one that we have data.
Yes.
Right now.
So something that Dr. Marta Frias was saying is really important, because transformative justice is an instrument to view the source of inequalities and also how to respond to those sources. So it's a structural change, and it could lead to social change and cultural change through qualitative research, as I was saying as well. And yeah, try to see people's perceptions of how our legal system to include people is actually being effective or not. So it truly is something that could help justify a way of legislation changing their ways to include people and to be socially inclusive.
Martin, we have another question that you can describe the procedure or the recruitment of the participants.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. As we were saying, it was the samples that we used, the individuals that we shared our questions with was a non-probabilistic convenience sample, meaning that we share this questionnaire via social media, and we try to include as many people that we could in Hermosillo, Sonora, which is where we are located. So it was a non-probabilistic convenience sample.
So do you anticipate if you're gonna try to use this scale and understand the phenomenon, do you plan to actually expand the sample and kind of access more? Because I can see how this topic probably would be more useful to study with across different group with different backgrounds as well.
Yes, we consider, well, I'm only studying a PhD, just one. So we're going to try to amplify the sample. Truly, we are going to try, due to time, we only have one year left. So we have to be very specific about and very humble about our expectations, because we can't expect to try to evaluate the whole world, but we are going to try to amplify the sample, maybe include another context. And it truly, like you were saying, it truly is important to continue to assess the need to transformative justice. And yeah, we're only human, so we are going to try. And, but yeah, we go from here to where we can. So yeah, we are going to do our best to try to amplify the inclusion criteria, and we're going to try to amplify the sample and get more people involved. And yeah, try. We can only try.
Yeah, I don't mean to use that as to challenge the way you recruit, because I'm always curious about how people in different places, in terms of how they what method they use, because I know that like there are certain countries where social media is definitely the way to go to access more people. In certain countries, probably not, because there's still a large percentage of people don't have access to the internet. So I'm just curious, in Mexico, there's what are the methods that people use to recruit participants?
Actually, I think that in Mexico, we have a good access to technology in that way. So we definitely shared it through social media. In our case, it was the best way to go, because as you were saying, there are some countries that have access to technological resources, and I think that we are one of them. We are one of the countries that have access to those elements. But definitely, I think another way that we can increase the inclusion criteria is through collaboration. So if you guys want to work with us, we will be very happy to have you work with us, because it truly is important that we can mobilize this scale in other ways, so probably through collaboration. So it truly is an honor to be here, and thank you very much for inviting us. And it was so glad to meet you guys. And yeah.
I have to I would like to say that in Mexico we share by phone. And in Mexico, most of the people, I think 99% of the people have a cell phone. So we don't have this big bias in technology because we using the cell phone, and the cell phone is very common even in poor people. Almost everybody has a cell phone. So in this case, we can avoid the bias in this way. Not only the people who use the social media, and we share everything with the invitation and everything by cell phone.
Okay, so I want to say thank you very much for inviting us, and I think that would be all for us because there's another session. So thank you very much for joining us, and we have our information that will be delivered to you, so you can get in contact with us if you want to discuss some other aspects of this research. Thank you very much.